continue. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning for you on the West Coast. Welcome to the CI Security and MDS webinar on security management challenges. There's a lot going on in the world, and they are impacting cybersecurity. So we're here to talk about them and how businesses can, help handle them and alleviate any of the risk that might be involved. Just to let you guys know, the Q&A is open. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to just type them in and I'll field them for our presenter. This is me talking. I'm Samantha Orzelak. I am the head of marketing here at MDS. I don't have nearly as much experience as our main presenter, Mike, but I do have some background within the technology space.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. My name is Mike Hamilton, and we are partnered with MDS, and I'm happy to give you the benefit of my experiences. I've been in information security for about 30 years, and honestly, I have had every job in this business down to the equivalent of the InfoSec dishwasher. I started hand rolling firewalls in Southern California, contracted and consulted, worked a year at TRW in Redondo Beach. We did a year and a half at Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas. I worked for Safeway, Applied Materials, the people that make the machines that make semiconductor chips and have Intel's chip designs 3 revs out on their network. So a lot of interesting experiences. Was the managing consultant for VeriSign Global Security Consulting, and decided to take a giant haircut and become the Chief of Information Security for the city of Seattle. And so for about the last 10 years, I've worked in government. I was also a policy advisor for Governor Inslee in Washington State, vice chair of a government coordinating council with Homeland Security focused on infrastructure protection, and a whole bunch of stuff. So hopefully I'm going to be able to bring to bear some of these experiences and some of the things I do in terms of open source intelligence monitoring, and we'll be talking about a few of those things.
Mike, it looks like it's not sent live anymore. Do you want to try stop sharing and share again?
Okay. Wow, that's weird. Okay.
Yeah, we were all set.
Okay, what do you see?
And that. Can you send live at all? This has never happened before.
Can I send live? I'm not sure what that means.
All right, 1 sec.
Let me stop this. Seems to be working for me. And try that again. Okay, what do you see?
Because it usually, hold on, let me see something.
Well, we thought Teams was a good platform for webinars. Maybe it's not. These are new Teams features, the ability to do a webinar. Okay, it says live. What do you see?
It says live on our end.
Do you see the slide?
Not yet.
Huh, interesting.
I see the slide. And it's showing live.
Yep, see it now.
Okay, Sam, you want to talk to the slide? Okay, I will talk to this slide. So the combination of Maureen Data Systems and CI Security allows us to rapidly serve your needs in security based on contracts that are already in existence. That is a shortcut to the procurement process, and frankly, CI security works insofar as possible through channel only. And so Maureen Data Systems has been a partner of ours for quite a while. Let me just say too, the reason CI security exists is because we intentionally focus on the things that are critical. The health sector and local government in particular are two of our markets. And if you think about it, that is an insane business plan because those are two sectors that really, let's say, are on the fiscal ropes right now. Nonetheless, now is no time for hospitals to be knocked over with ransomware. Now is not the time for cities and counties to experience, information security events when they're running elections and 911 and water purification and waste treatment. These things are what we focus on. We have a wide breadth of customers, from railroad car manufacturers to intellectual property law firms. But the things we focus on are the ones that are important. You guys still seeing slides okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay, good. All right, so here's our agenda. I want to talk about current events, just a little situational awareness. And I will be honest with you, I put these together more than a week ago. Current events are not current events in cybersecurity after a week. But we will talk about what's current. Supply chain and third-party security, this is becoming a bigger and bigger driver of security. And in fact, I will expand this a little bit and talk about not so much the expectations of your customers, business partners, but security as a competitive differentiator, because this is where this is going. This is pointing towards market forces that are going to adjudicate security more than regulatory pressure. And then we're going to talk about that regulatory pressure because it's not going away for the foreseeable future, but it's shifting. Election security, we'll talk a little bit about that, what nation states are doing right now. And then finally, the situation we're all in with this COVID-19 work from home business, what's different about this and what do you need to do in order to get some visibility out to what is a very distributed workforce right now, potentially on platforms you can't control? What could possibly go wrong, right? Okay, for your situational awareness, this is just current events. And I like I say, I go through a lot of open source intelligence, otherwise known as news. I remember when I had a security clearance, and I was a vice chair of that government coordinating council. Everybody got a clearance. So I got a secret clearance. Secret clearance lets you watch CNN. It's not a big deal, but there is quite a bit of information that you can glean from just open source intelligence. So for the last 11 years, I have been putting out 5 days a week. About 20 curated articles that I've pulled from a number of sources that are separated into the jaw droppers, what's going on in healthcare, what's going on in the finance sector, what's government, military, and nation states doing. And so I pull a lot of stuff from that. If you want to sign up for that, it's really a great 5 minutes you can spend every morning. Comes in email. You will get it at 8:15 a.m. Eastern time. Cup of coffee. Go through that 5 minutes, everything going on in the world, hopefully as it applies to you. So here's what's going on. Everything is about COVID-19 right now. Threat actors have changed their tactics. It's always been a feature of organized crime to weaponize news, right? Saddam Hussein found alive, click here, right? That actually worked. So the bait now is COVID-19 bait. And, there's been a real spike in this because people are so anxious and so in need of information, they're going to be willing to bite on the bait. And it's not just, coming in email to your computer. There are text messages coming saying your phone has been detected near another phone that's owned by a person that's been diagnosed. Click here, and man, that works. So this is coming your employees all the time now. Fraudulent payment notices because of the haze of chaos right now. Everybody is having to change their supply chain, their procurement. Things are being disrupted, and so fake payment notices are all over the place. Invoices that are not real, and people are paying them. and then the tools that your workforce is using to get access to your networks are being attacked. They're being offered fake applications to download, having to do with COVID maps and things like that. Your employees are being bludgeoned by all of this. Meanwhile, out there in organized crime land, credentials, passwords, much bigger problem than malware. Microsoft has some interesting data on the rise in the number of sites that are intended to get your credentials, to get your password, phishing sites, and the corresponding drop in sites that push malware. That is very telling. If I have your password, I walk into your network rather than packaging up some exotic exploit, hoping that you're going to bite on it. And then maybe the vulnerability that I'm trying to exploit works, maybe not. So passwords, credentials, huge problem right now. And the way that they are being used is in password spraying. I can try all of your employees with a single password one at a time, and then start at the top again with password number 2 and go through all your employees. In that way, nobody gets 3 tries inside a couple of minutes and they don't get locked out. And that could just go on forever. So hopefully you're monitoring those things. Credentials that have been disclosed online, the big data breaches, they're all being tried to see if anybody shares passwords. Remote desktop protocol that many of you are using for remote access right now, being subjected mightily to brute force attacks right now. And again, if you're not watching your networks, you don't even know that's going on. The unemployment insurance fraud is really bad here in Washington State. It started out mainly schools and government, and then has expanded to lots of different sectors. What's suspicious about it is that it's projected to be Nigerian actors, but the data set that they have, they didn't steal it. So there may be a little more to that story. So what's going on? So what do I mean supply chain security here? Everybody is getting very nervous about who they're doing business with, and specifically when there are components that are produced elsewhere by organizations in other nations, where those other nations have maybe more influence over those companies than makes us comfortable. So we're trying to freeze out Huawei and some other companies, and they're not taking it well. So just real quick, there is an issue going on right now where we know that a customer of ours we did incident response for, and turns out they had a lot of data stolen, and it was posted online for sale. And one of the owners of that property turns out to be one of these Chinese companies, and their lawyers are on the warpath. And so it's getting real serious. Everybody is trying to steal COVID research. And in fact, another one of our incident response customers is a research firm doing exactly that. And they've been I won't say crushed, but they got hit pretty hard. Executive order, basically telling the energy sector, you buy stuff domestically. And here's a really interesting one too. This is, so CMMC, the Cyber Maturity Model Certification. If you do any business with the Department of Defense, you need to subject your organization to a third-party examination against a maturity model. And in order to bid on certain size or types of contracts, you have to reach a certain maturity. Otherwise, don't even bid. You won't even be taken seriously. And this is an example of how security becomes a market force and a competitive differentiator. Right there, we just tied revenue to security. And that is different than saying, here are your regulatory requirements. Please take this bat and hit yourself in the head with it. So this is actually, this and some of the other things the FFIEC has been telling all of their banks. I think the NCUA says the same thing to credit unions. You need to monitor all of your business associates for their security and demonstrate the effectiveness of your third-party security management monitoring program. Wow. Okay, so that's a regulation right now, but what it leads to is a market force. Buy from us because we're more secure than our competitors. Finally, there's this malware, Quampirs, and it's focused on the health sector, and its specialty is coming in through supply chain, right? So looking for that unlocked window I'll compromise, the manufacturer of urinal cakes for the hospitals, and we'll come in through the side door like that. Actually going on, and successfully, I will point. Regulatory pressure not going to go away. Interesting thing though, privacy is driving regulation right now more than anything else. Right, so the GDPR in the EU was the start of it. It's fairly prescriptive in the notifications that you need to make to customers you may have that are in the European Union. If you don't have customers in the European Union, this doesn't apply to you that much. We have had to do a deep dive in our company about this. But now here come the domestic ones, right? So the California Consumer Privacy Act, the SHIELD Act is in New York, and there are more coming. And in fact, you've seen the magnitude of the fines they're talking about here. And in California, they want to make them bigger. So that is regulatory pressure, and it's not going to go away. Just like we ended up with 50 state data breach reporting statutes because the federal government never got its act together and gave us one, we are going to end up with 50 privacy acts, 50 states, and then Puerto Rico. So your regulators, yes, they want you to regulate your business partners. Again, the FFIEC in particular, but also, Health and Human Services adjudicates the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And you do not do business with a covered entity until you've signed a business associate agreement and said, yes, we understand we are subject to the regulations of HIPAA as well, because we are now a business partner of this hospital or this other covered entity. The non-regulatory enforcement, this is where it gets real interesting too. Federal Trade Commission has the ability to declare a business in practicing deceptive trade acts. So what happens is, if there's some kind of cyber event, the Federal Trade Commission will determine whether or not your public-facing statements were consistent with your internal controls. And if they're not, they're going to tell you that is deceptive trade practice, and they're going to bring out the hammer. And they're getting real good at it. And then here's the non-regulatory enforcement. Again, it's the expectations from shareholders and customers and business partners that are starting to move the needle here. Here's one that we ought to pay attention to. What was the name of the company? LabCorp or something like that? Had 2 different breaches, and their shareholder, because of the drop in share value, their shareholders went on the warpath. And there's a class action suit which names the executives in the suit. So now these things are starting to pierce the corporate veil and get into the C-suite. Okay, yeah, election security. Wow. Okay, so first of all, honestly, the whole hacking thing is all but a red herring here. Okay, hacking voting machines, and especially the electronic ones, nearly none are connected to the internet. So you really would need physical proximity. You need to be alone with a voting machine. You need to have weaponized malware that you could insert into there. It is a red herring. Is it possible? Yeah, it's also possible that a meteorite hits my car. Theft of ballots. There's been a lot of talk about that because this isn't cyber, but there are electronic systems involved for counting and reading barcodes and matching signatures and things like that. So there is actually an exposure there. Theft of ballots, is a 19th century way of doing it. But here in Washington State, we only vote by mail. I've never known any other way since I've lived here. And I don't think we've ever had this problem. The real problem is the disinformation that's going around. And I know everybody sees this, and the bots on Twitter that are programmed to respond in a certain way when somebody says something, and just the complete cruft hitting the social media, and Americans' propensity to believe wild stories when they confirm their deeply held beliefs, right? This is a much bigger problem than hacking, and it's also a more difficult one to solve. Hacking, we can build a shell around something. I can stand there with a gun and make sure nobody messes with a voting machine. But the control between somebody's ears, that was a lot harder to work with. And then the failure to fund security for elections. Coming up to this election, The implication there is extremely clear. It's going to be real easy, given the fact that there's a pandemic, given the fact that we don't trust voting machines because, you know, there have been hacks. Those hacks are really more interested in voter rolls, because that's how the surgical delivery of disinformation works. Right? This whole Cambridge Analytica bit. But if you fail to fund this, and there are this many questions around this, we didn't put any effort into it. The implication here is quite clear. All the results are going to be called into question. Next election, it's going to be settled in the courts, is what I believe, because there is seemingly an intentional dereliction of duty in funding the security of elections when we know that this is a problem. Okay, here's what countries are doing. It is really, really active out there right now. So yes, countries are hacking for COVID data. The NSA just put out another warning about the sandworm Russian group and what they're doing, looking for open SMB shares because there's an exploit for that. The disinformation campaigns that I talked about, China and Russia are extremely active in that. North Korea steals money. They hide behind this organized crime methodology of ransomware, but it's the North Koreans, and they're actually doing it to fund their weapons of mass destruction program and to, you know, survive the crippling sanctions. They're stealing money from millions at a time. Russians did the San Francisco airport, and there was a water utility in Czechoslovakia. And now we are getting into some serious critical infrastructure here. In Israel, Iran attacked a water utility. This is like 2 weeks ago, and apparently the Iranians had control of the chlorine injection systems, which, believe me, that is a perfect way to kill a lot of people with a keyboard. These guys are not messing around. It's a really good thing that Israel detected that attack and put an end to it, because that could have ended bad. And then the Israelis turned right around and hit an Iranian port. Of course, the Iranians say that was a failed attack. I'm sure that disrupted some operations. India and Pakistan hacking each other like crazy, and they both have nukes. What could possibly go wrong? And here's these Nigerian scammers in overdrive that are doing all of this unemployment insurance impersonation fraud. It has been reported that Russians are paying Africans to be trolls on Facebook and Twitter and start arguments with people. And it is not a reach to say, well, they're also paying for all of this scamming to go on and all of this fake registering for unemployment benefits. They have to have a big data set to do this. Equifax keeps coming up as the potential one, but we never saw the office personnel management data. We thought China had that. We have never seen, to my knowledge, the Primera data. I don't think Nigerian scammers hacked giant data sets. That's not their MO, but that is a Russian MO, and it's also a Chinese MO. So Russians paying Africans to be trolls, are they also providing the data set and some automation support for the Nigerian scammers going right now? Nobody knows. I think it would be extremely interesting to find out two things. Number one, what's the minimum amount of time somebody has been employed that they have been a victim of this fraud? Because if nobody who has been employed with a company for fewer than, say, 3 years, well, that puts a lower limit on when the data set was stolen. And I'd also look at the frequency of the signups on state systems. Because if it looks, it's easy to tell if there was automation behind something. Anyway, I hope the FBI says something about this pretty soon, because nobody's saying anything. It's going on and states are trying to stop it. But here's all the stuff that nations are involved in right now. What could possibly go wrong? That's one of my favorite sayings. Okay, so COVID. So here's where we are. You got people at home, and maybe you send them home with a computer, or maybe they got to use their own home computer. This really is kind of forcing us into this whole zero trust architecture, where a combination of your credentials, your location on Earth, and the device you're using are what allow you to access network assets that need to check you out before you get that access. So banks have been doing this for a long time, right? You know that if you use some other device that you've never used before to access your bank site, it'll go, whoa, 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 whoa. Here's your second factor. So anyway, zero trust workforces out there. We got to figure out a way to monitor this, right? We've got some preventive controls. I'm sure that everybody did what they could to put prevention in place. But these are the people that are being hit with the bait. And I will tell you, again, another incident response story from 2 weeks ago. Got called by a law firm, and they had been locked up with ransomware. And what had happened was 2 of the attorneys who were working from home were intentionally targeted because it was known that they were going to be going back into the network. So law firm says, okay, we're going to open up. We will use social distancing. We will stagger, shifts so that people don't have to congregate. And they hit the network, and right away the ransomware woke up, started looking for the good stuff, encrypted everything, and now they are struggling to survive. Contact tracing. That'll work if everybody buys into it. If I give you an app on your phone and it's supposed to tell you when you've been around somebody that's, been exposed or been diagnosed with COVID-19, boy, that just opens the floodgates for all kinds of doorknob twisting and fraud and phone compromise, etc. The Australians put out a government app, and it's been pretty panned. Or we could trust the private sector. So Google and Apple have put something together. Don't know the degree people are going to buy into this. There's also a federal privacy bill. This is interesting, where they are trying to put restrictions on data use, trying to take a cue from what happened with this Australian app. What's going on with data use? Well, so there's restrictions on data use for commercial purposes. Okay, for your contact data, right? Who you associate with, but there doesn't seem to be any restrictions on use of the data for political purposes, strangely enough. And so if you know what someone's contacts look like, you eventually get to an influencer, and this is the way that all the Facebook data and probably some of the stolen data sets are used for that surgical delivery of disinformation that will talk to your particular pathology, right? So contact tracing apps, jury's out. And then there's the great returning. And I've written a piece on this that I've submitted to a magazine. They haven't done anything with it yet, so I'm fine giving this away. If you're interested, I can send you a primer on the things to think about before you bring in those computers. How you're going to stagger that, how you're going to deal with the social issues. Man, people had to become their own home IT departments and home security departments, and stuff's going to come back real dirty. So I'm happy to give that away. Secure Computing Magazine is looking at it now, and I'm not going to wait for them. Okay, so before we do QA, I want to say 2 things. We talked about monitoring out there in the distributed environment and starting to embrace this whole zero trust thing. Monitoring a distributed workforce is hard, and it relies on something out there at the endpoint and a logging facility that will inform you of events you need to know about, and not just, hey, the antivirus went off. That means something got stopped. I mean, a thing woke up and it's scanning the network, things like that. That can be done with Windows Defender and Advanced Threat Protection from Microsoft, or you can go out and buy like a FireEye agent or CrowdStrike or whatever. But monitoring that environment is something that we need to address. Now, because credentials are in scope more than malware, okay, both Google and Microsoft have said, if you use multi-factor authentication, you make phishing essentially irrelevant, right? If I'm going to be challenged with a second factor, I'll give you my damn password because it's not going to do you any good. This is the way to get around the biggest problem. You can use an authenticator app like Duo or something like that. It's really not a good practice to use it over SMS as a text message, but do something. And then secondarily, and probably more importantly, personal use on a personal device. If you sent computers home and they have VPN access back into your network, you don't want somebody clicking through Facebook personality tests on that computer. So if you can communicate this to your users, whether or not you can enforce it, it's important to say it. Don't spend, clock cycles on that system doing things that are personal, because that's where all this COVID bait is coming in from, right? It's all the social media and all the different communication channels. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm sure everybody is insanely happy about that. And hopefully we'll have some questions. And so, should I take this out of presenter mode? I'm going to take this.
Oh, you can do. Actually, you can leave it up like this. This should be
Okay.
fine. Yeah, so they can have something to look at. Yeah, so we do have a few questions, and again, feel free to type them into the Q&A. It's a little question mark up at the top, and I can field them for him. So the first question we have is, why can't we just keep hackers out?
So that's a good question. That is really like on everybody's minds all the time. And generally, it's because we're so outgunned. The organized crime business is a business, and they have coding competitions and pay bonuses and have conferences, right? This is serious. Now, if you think about it, if you are especially, IT that's tasked with doing security, or you have maybe one or two security folks in your shop, what's lined up against you are thousands of people that want your money, thousands. And increasingly, they're nation states lined up. So why can't you just keep them out? Because they invest a whole lot more than we do. They beat us in numbers, both in terms of bodies and in terms of investment. So, this is one of the reasons why we are adamant about monitoring to augment your preventive controls. Those preventive controls are going to fail. There's always a way to get in. I will throw a USB stick into your parking lot and wait. When something happens, you have got to see that signal on the network, and you've got to put out the little fire before the house burns down. And I'll tie up this thought with, I'll say one thing. There are really only three outcomes that you want to avoid, okay? Unwrap your head from scary Russian cyber buffer overflow SQL injection and think about these three things: unauthorized disclosure of protected records, theft and extortion, and just flat out disruption for the sake of disruption. Those are the only things that go wrong. And you can figure out a price tag for every one of those. A record is worth roughly $200, according to Larry Poneman and Verizon and all kinds of other people. If you have 1 million records in a database, you have a potential of $100 million in liability there. Can I have $50,000 to cut that risk in half? Well, you just paid $50,000 to reduce your risk by $50 million. That's a good deal. That's the way to have the conversation. The scary Russian cyber stuff is out there, but it's really not the way to approach a solution to the problem. The problem needs to be articulated in fiscal terms. Okay, that's a really long answer to that question, and only half of that was really responsive. So I hope that worked.
No, it was good. Don't worry. So the second question is, it can be difficult to find and retain IT employees. Mm-hmm. You've been a cybersecurity manager for a long time now. So what strategies do you suggest?
Well, I'll tell you what our strategy is, and I will. I'll tell you that this is a better way to move the needle than any other that we've come. So a long time ago, I got grant funding. If you're the CISO of the City of Seattle, you can get grant funding, and set up a regional monitoring project so that we could monitor 9 cities and counties, 6 maritime ports on Puget Sound, Seattle Children's Hospital, Snohomish PUD, a couple energy utilities. And all the data went to one place, and we had a map with the attack surface of our region. And that was great. And then I ran screaming out of government, so that thing had to stop. So we brought it back. But the way we brought it back is the following way. We perform security monitoring like we do for our commercial customers, small cities and counties, down market local governments. And we do that for free through a nonprofit that I created. And rather than the data that we collect from these networks coming over to our analysts, it goes over to the Washington State Academic Cyber Range. And now 3 universities, and soon many others, are teaching curriculum around this. So yeah, students get, book learning, university degree. They sit their butts in seats as operational analysts in front of live fire. And when they come out of that, we hire them. That's how we build our employees. And frankly, as Homeland Security has thrown its weight behind this program, if fundamentally all this cyber nonsense, this is a people problem. We are solving a people problem. We are a focal point for the employees that are super hard to get. But if you really, really wanted to fix this problem, you don't go out to a venture capital company and get a bunch of money for your new magic product that's going to automate everything with artificial intelligence. You build people. And so we're building people. And that is one way to do it. So if you ever come across the Pisces project, Public Infrastructure Security Cyber Education System, you want to go after those graduates, because there are few that you can get at an entry level that actually have that operational experience. And so that creates an economy that we take advantage of. And now actually we're getting into a fist fight with Boeing for these resources. So we need more schools, and we're about to set up on the East Coast out at Alabama A&M. So that should provide more of a pipeline of the people you're looking for. It's a crazy thing we do, but it's what's moving the needle.
Thank you. So we did have a few questions come in, some more. So the first question is, how does Microsoft truly stack up against CrowdStrike or Sophos? State-sponsored espionage will never stop. The end use can be our weakest click-happy person or our champion. Your thoughts?
So in my view, Microsoft had to play a little bit of catch-up, but they have performed well. And in the way that they have combined advanced threat protection and Defender as an endpoint agent, and then made events visible through something called MCAS, the Microsoft Cloud Application Security. It's basically a logging stream, and it's got super high fidelity events in it. How does that stack up against CrowdStrike and FireEye, for example, Cylance? I mean, there's a bunch of them. One of the key features that you need out of an endpoint agent is the ability to quarantine. And Microsoft, because for the most part, 90% of us are Microsoft shops. We all use Active Directory. Active Directory, specifically Azure AD in the cloud, can be used to quarantine any asset on your network. When I say quarantine, it puts it into limited network connectivity so that we can check it out, but it can't arbitrarily go all over to Uzbekistan and whatever it's trying to do. So when your endpoint, and this is why I think Defender is good. So every endpoint agent is not going to be 100% effective, but when it fails, if that asset starts to do something like scan the network, right? Because this is the way ransomware works, right? When it drops, it's going to go look for the good stuff to lock up. It's not going to go on somebody's laptop. Nobody cares about that. So you have time to see this stuff. So Defender failed, right? Somebody used an exploit that Defender didn't know about. But then the asset, and this is actually a real story that happened with a gigantic school district near here. It's one of our customers. When it starts scanning the network for the stuff, then Defender is reporting that. And through this MCAS logging stream, if you're ingesting this, it's a super high fidelity event, and you can pull that trigger right away and go, you're in jail. That is a key feature of the endpoint agents, more than the technology that they use for detection. All of this machine learning, artificial intelligence stuff, Cylance in particular, researchers figured out a way to just feed it bad training data and fool it. So industries are springing up to do exactly that. But that key feature, FireEye's console is called Helix. It does exactly the same thing. I'm not sure what CrowdStrike's is called, but that is a very common feature in the maturing endpoint security space, and especially with our distributed workforce and our need to monitor events out there. I think Defender stacks up really well. mainly from the perspective that you can integrate it with your monitoring and know what's going on out there when there's been a failure of prevention. Hope that answered the question.
Yes. Okay. The next question that came up is, do you believe it's a conflict of interest for the head of security to report to the CIO?
Yes.
Thoughts overcoming this cycle?
Yes. And this is, again, you know, when we recast our conversation in terms of dollars and potential liability and things like that, and you know, we are clear about we're trying to avoid records disclosure, theft and extortion, service disruption, you know, regulatory compliance, penalty. I mean, there's, you know, you turn this into money, and this starts to become clearly a fiduciary responsibility. So, you know, if the CIO controls the security budget, there are lots of competing forces there, right? We're all in our, you know, kind of digital transformation, and everybody's trying to hang every piece of IoT on the network they can so that they can manage building energy consumption and turn lights on and off, you know, when people are there, whatever. That's what IT is supposed to be doing. And so if security reports to IT, there is a little, you know, conflict of interest there. In my view, the better reporting structure, and we need to really firmly get it into this, we're talking about money and not cyber all the time. A better reporting structure is CFO, general counsel, director of risk management, things like that. But it's individuals that have a clear fiduciary responsibility and are focused on risk reduction, right? The likelihood of a bad event, the impact of that event. You buy down the likelihood with preventive controls, you buy down the impact with effective, rapid response and the ability to detect. So, you know, recasting that conversation and being more focused on business, right? There were two things I used to say all the time when I was the Seattle guy, and that's the business has to win, and we don't focus on round-off error. So I understand the intent of that question, and I completely agree that reporting to IT is not the way. It's going to take a while to change.
We have a few more minutes. We can ask some more questions. This one's about the pandemic that's going on. Ransomware criminals said they would stop attacking healthcare. Do you think that really happened, or was it a ploy?
No, it did not happen. And so there was a group that said they would do that. There are lots of groups out there, and in fact, you can buy ransomware as a service and not even know who the victim is. So not a lot can be done about that. But the narrative now is that because, remember what I said, our primary markets are the health sector and local government. That's who the ransomware operators go after preferentially, because they know that those organizations do things that are so critical that they cannot survive any lapse in their continuity at all. And so in general, they're going to pay the ransom. And, you know, this is actually being held up by insurance companies who say, well, it's going to cost us a lot more to build everything back, and you need to get back to work right now, so we're going to pay the ransom. So insurance companies' business model folds into organized crime's business model. So I hope that is answering the question. No, they did not stop doing that. And in fact, there's been overt targeting of the health sector. And this is why, in fact, this is just a few days ago, United Nations, Red Cross, Madeleine Albright, CEO of Microsoft, all came out and said, you have got to stop hitting the health sector. You know, talking to criminals, and said governments must get involved here. So whether or not that happens, is probably an open question. But I do think there is some movement, and hopefully it's because of, you know, my constant harping on my own senators, to start treating our logical borders as we treat physical borders, and expect a standard of behavior if your packet crosses this point, and if it is demonstrated that you have actors in your country who are ripping us off, then we're going to lock out all your legitimate business traffic, and your business leaders can go yell at you. And again, market forces make the business community pissed off in Russia, and behavior will change. So no, they didn't stop hacking hospitals, we're still cleaning up after them.
Unfortunate.
Mhm.
So this one's in terms of election security. We were able to complete the census online. Why can't we just vote online?
Because it's so easily manipulated that nobody would be able to trust the results. That's today's world. Just because we haven't had 2 years to, bulletproof and test some application that we could trust, open it up to scrutiny. Remember, we don't get to see, the source code that runs voting machines. So in order for that trust to be there, this has got to be really transparent, and it's got to be demonstrably secure. Now, so that said, we can't do that today because the apps that have been tried, in fact, this is reported yesterday, one of them that was probably on the shortest list for the voting app is awful. But the country of Estonia has been doing this for some time. And, that is the country that has been hit the hardest by the Russians. A friend of mine is Estonian, and she was actually in the Estonian SOC while the Russians were trying to take down their infrastructure. And if Estonia can go to online voting and online services and get it done, we can do it. This election, not going to happen. We needed to start, a project here, 2 years ago, not multiple weeks ago.
Thank you. The next one is, your team has been doing a lot of incident response lately. Are you seeing trends in why organizations are getting breached?
Yes. One of those trends is people working with their own personal computers for remote access, because there is no way to enforce controls there. Another trend is the method in which they are providing remote access to their employees. If they are using a Citrix right now has a vulnerability that if you haven't patched it, the Russians are coming. This was actually part of that NSA announcement as well. If you opened up remote desktop protocol and it's wide open into the network, as many of you know, there's a tool out there called Shodan. And Shodan, you can ask it, find me all the cameras on the internet that are this brand. Find me all of the home routers in Brazil that still have default credentials. All this stuff is findable. And, I just don't think it's going to end well. So I hope that answered that.
Yeah. And then the last one, we have about a few more minutes. Have you seen the nature of cyber attacks change since the pandemic began?
Yeah, well, just to kind of follow up on that last thing, right? If remote desktop protocol is wide open, there's brute forcing going on. And people are not seeing that. The tools that they are using for remote access are being attacked. And so like Zoom is the poster child for that, and Zoom still has a security problem. So with all of that going on, I will say that to provide that remote access, there are certain things that on the face of them, it's going to sound like a joke, but if you use, for example, Citrix will expose single applications, and it's a brokered connection, right? You connect to a server that connects to the application you want. Log me in, go to my PC. These are also brokered connections. So that nasty endpoint out there is not actually connected to your network. That's a reasonable way to do it if you have people working from home. Because one of the trends, right, these trends, it's people at home who are no longer within the confines of a building where we have physical security, logical security, monitoring, lots of controls, all that's out the window. And to the extent that there are people on home computers, this is a major entry point right now. And I will say, in addition to that, remember, you got a lot of junk in your house, right? There's voice assistants, and some people have, internet connected doorbells, light bulbs, refrigerators. God, if I didn't have a smart fridge, I would never know when I was out of milk. And these are all potential entry points as well. So it's, what is the person out there that needs remote access? What are they working on? That's being, exploited right now. What method are they using to connect? That's being exploited right now. And the common thread around all this is COVID-19, because it's taken on, the mantle of the preferred bait. And in fact, you know what? We're starting to see the Black Lives Matter bait, because that's how criminals work. Anything that's interesting enough to get you to bite on, because we all know there is not now, nor will there ever be, a firewall for stupid.
Perfect. So I think that wraps up the questions. That was all very great. Thank you so much, Mike. So next steps, we're going to be sending out a follow-up information with the presentation and some links that you can review what was discussed today. However, if you are interested in Mike's article or you have any additional questions, you can definitely feel free to reach out to myself and I'll make sure to get in touch with him. And so we'd like to thank you for your time today, and everyone please stay safe. I think that went well, and there was a few